after all this very hectic year, we finally got a few days off right now, and thought it'd be a good thing to do. I have one more episode of Food Bites, which was going to cover the back of the food bank area that I do with Louise, and we have Wayne Dunn involved in that a bit as well. But I thought it would be a good thing. This is season 2 of Food Bites. It's almost over. And I just thought I would try to get some overall impressions as to, do you have a sense of the year that really sticks out to you more than others?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. Maybe stability in some senses. Yeah. I think that, we've gone through 2 years of unprecedented growth in terms of at the food bank, and unprecedented growth with clients, but also unprecedented growth with food. Yeah. The amount of food that's come in from grocery stores, the amount of fresh produce, the extent to which we go. So it feels this past year we've kind of steadied out a bit, and it's not constant growth so much anymore. It's just it's sort of steadiness, I think.
So let's talk about that. Like, the food drives aren't up the way that they used to be. They've kind of steadied out somewhat, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely reflects the kind of challenges that average Londoners and businesses are facing out there, right? It's not been easy with inflation. I know for businesses, it's not been an easy time as they try to economically get adjusted to this kind of new era, but definitely for donors, they've got high rents, high food prices, all these other responsibilities. We've talked to many donors who, like us, their kids have come back home to stay because they had trouble being able to afford to live out on their own. So, I just think there's lots of challenges. So I do think, in many ways, it's amazing that the food drives have been so great given those kind of pressures. And you and I have gone into these different food drives each year and kind of wondered, how is it going to be? And they've come out okay, fine. Yeah. But it's a level of how much the public confidence in this kind of food system and helping people is there. Did it help your confidence that way?
Yeah, I think, the past couple of years with the food drives, they did go up because it was about the need, and it was about the fact that we basically had gone up. We basically doubled in 2 years. Yeah. Such unprecedented growth. I think the public has maintained their giving at that higher level, but it is true, it's steadied out. But I think they give differently. And then I think the reason why they give is, I think, it's the past couple of years there was awareness of the need, but I think more and more it's continued to be about the fact that they just want to participate in helping the neighbor because they know the needs are so great. Yeah. So I think that's been great. So obviously, they've given in money, they've given in food, but the biggest thing they've given in time. So one of the, we've obviously seen so many people down at the food bank just wanting to lend an extra hand and just see what kind of goes on. And I think we've been able to be steady in maintaining, this is just a grassroots movement of average people helping other average people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I've always loved the food bank. We've been at it almost 40 years now, but that organic feel to it, just that it's citizens, they all show up on a particular day and they all just want to make a difference. They all have difference of opinions, different political persuasions, maybe even religious differences or whatever it is. None of that ever comes up, right? It's just always they're there to help. All of their creeds or beliefs or whatever it is, they all have that one essential piece to it about helping your neighbor, and so they gather around that element.
I think that's true. I think, over the past couple of years, we have really increased the amount of fresh produce that's there. Yeah. But in many ways, that got driven by our volunteers as well. It did. In terms of the number of years, the number of folks who wanted to, let's say, come down and help out in the back garden. That was actually a volunteer-driven thing until we had a couple staff members that were involved per se, but their main role still was inside the food bank. But there was gardens. It became obviously a larger thing with greenhouses and green walls and all sorts of other things, and now it's grown to where it is. I think the grocery stores and the produce was really also driven by obviously the philosophy of trying to deal with food waste and helping folks, but it was also driven by the volunteers down at the food bank going, wow, I just wish we could get more fresh produce. I wish we could, I wish we could give healthier food to people. And I think it's been a number of different things, and so the food bank has been one of the leaders amongst the community in some of those fresh things, but that was driven by all the people at the food bank wanting to make a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, it's over 50% now the food is fresh or perishable.
I think it's 56 or 57.
That's right.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's an amazing thing. It was only 20, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But that reflects not so much the management of us or even of the board. It is true. I can remember getting emails a decade ago of people saying, I go through your options about donating, but I'd like to be able to donate fresh food. How can I do that?
Yeah.
And that was really hard to do, because to donate at a grocery store means it might have stayed there for a day or two. They were hesitant about that. They couldn't come down and drop it off themselves. So many donated money online to be able for us to purchase that. But now you're just seeing more and more of all of this fresh food coming in. And my sense, Jane, is I didn't want this program so much to be about the food bank. It's just the growing awareness, I think, in London. And I think the pandemic really kind of sealed it. It was there before the pandemic. But the idea that, we're part of a food system that has massive levels of waste, like over 1 billion tons a year is wasted globally. And we're aware of all of that. We're concerned about that, but often we feel we don't have much choice. My sense in the last few years, and especially since the pandemic, has been that people want those choices. And I think they're reflecting that to us.
Yeah, I think people want those choices. I think we also know individually we're all really bad at that.
Yeah.
But we see ourselves as being part of a food system, and so we want to make changes individually so we don't waste ourselves, but also we want to make sure that we help others with that. So I think that's true in terms of the food system. We're part of a larger whole, whether it's from the farmers all the way to, composting and the city green bin program. There's this whole cycle, and I think we're getting more and more continuing to get a holistic look at that. I think that's for sure.
Food and shelter, those are still always the two most important things. And we do know that I think one of the great reasons why we have thousands of volunteers in the food bank system that are helping us throughout the city. But a big part of the reason is you don't have to have a PhD to do it, right? Like we see
sometimes
kids,
it feels like it.
Yeah, especially in your part in trying to manage all of that. But I do think, we'll see school groups down there of people like 7 or 8 year old kids. They know the difference between an apple and a box of macaroni, whatever it is, right? But it doesn't require tons at that level. And I think when the pandemic came and things kind of shut down to a certain degree in London, people lacked volunteering opportunities. I really sensed a surge then at the food bank at that time, because we stayed open at that time during all of those years. And, they were a real challenge. But we started seeing these people that were really looking for opportunities to serve their community. And I think they can give us some of the examples of what people can do when they come and volunteer.
Yeah, we have 3,000 people on our database right now, which is pretty amazing. So I know the garden volunteers, in terms of the folks that deal with the garden and the greenhouse, people come and sort food. They make hampers. We're actually we have to make 300 hampers essentially a day. We're schlepping food. We're sorting the produce comes in. Schlepping. I mean, it's kind of what we do. It feels like that's all we do. Yeah. But we have food drives, so oftentimes we need people handing out bags at grocery stores to just remind people. And I think, to me, the biggest thing somebody can do to help the food bank is actually help their neighbors so people don't have to come down to the food bank. Yeah. It's not actually sometimes about coming down to the food bank. It's about being aware of the people around you, being compassionate. If your neighbor if your neighbor is struggling, you cook extra and you drop it off. Some of those kinds of things, and you just have that special care, particularly around the cost of things, cost of food and how expensive things are. So I I still think the awareness and the compassion and the understanding of what other people go through and taking that active interest in it makes a huge difference. So.
But it gets back to that organic feel. Like, it's one thing to see an organization and wish to support it, and Fortune Londoners do that to a lot of different groups, and it's awesome. But I do think there's something which when they decide they want to help something like the food bank or the other agencies that we assist on food issues, that when they look at those food issues, that's actually something they can do, right? And the kids can do, and as a family they can go and do it. So I do think it would be different, for instance, if you're up at a research kind of level studying homelessness or all of those things. It's way harder for people to find kind of an avenue of approach into that.
Yeah.
But around food, it's definitely there. I think, that was your impression about the stability. I think my impression more from the whole year has really been one of keeping the system stabilized. So it's not just the food bank, right?
Yep.
Like we began to realize at the beginning of this year that agencies were really having trouble.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then there were government cuts. Other things began to happen. There's lots of reasons and things why all those things take place. But we started to hear from the agencies that we help, and we help a large number of them, that they were running short themselves at the end of the month. So it's not just about clients, it was about agencies as well. And then all of these new agencies that we began speaking with who were getting, let's say, some city funding or government funding at another level or whatever, or because donations were down because people were having such a tough time in this economy, they began to approach us, mostly approach you, and they said, look, is there any way that the food bank can help in that? And I remember as it began to happen, you and I would sit down and talk and say, what are we going to do? Right? You and I had talked over the last decade about we didn't want to spend ridiculously because I think we both sensed that this was coming. We could see the needs growing. So we talked to our board about being ready for this moment when the other agencies came. But it was you they largely approached. And how did you feel about that? Did you have a sense of urgency in it, or did you just think it was incrementally moving there and you felt the need to respond to it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's incrementally moving there. I think the pandemic came along and society kind of changed. Yeah. Churches had been incredibly involved, having meals and hamper programs and also, there was Out of the Cold. It was a million things happening. And then people, all of that was over for obvious reasons, or took a bit of a hiatus. And so when people started coming back, there was all of a sudden homelessness had kind of exploded in terms of the need. There was just more and more people being food insecure. The prices of food skyrocketed. There's lots of food scarcity. So I think it did explode because people then they wanted to help. And I think you help individual and then you want to start gathering together in groups. And I think what kind of changed a little bit was, the community was helping us and they continue to help us. But all of a sudden now more and more the community was wanting help from us. But churches being a good example. If churches have started to come back, they were the givers. Now they don't have quite the same resources. And if they're going to run a program, they're actually wanting assistance from the community to assist. I think there's also, and I also think there's a desire to be kind of cohesive. And together, I think that explosion has been a little difficult, and I understand why, and I understand the need to help, because there's never enough, to be honest. There isn't. But I think what we saw was some of the core agencies really starting to struggle and fail, and that was where I think, I really agree that it was required us to step in and make sure that they were pretty stable. So let me ask that question of you, Glen, in terms of just your overall sense of food and where we're going in London and where we're at, or how things have changed.
I think we don't know anymore. I think, one of the great things about being a food bank in Southwestern Ontario is that although Southwest Ontario only has 4% of the growing land in the country, produces over 20% of the food. So I think food banks in Southwest Ontario really benefited from that. And it was great. A lot of generous farmers and growers and producers and processors and citizens and companies and faith groups. It was all really great. But now we're realizing that whole system is actually pretty expensive, right? It's sometimes hard to access and it's sometimes hard to understand. So I think it's been my sense that the community overall, as they did with homelessness, they were really troubled that it was that it was there and present, and then it grew and grew, and people began to want something needed to be done. I think they arrived at that point. I think it took one large donor who donated the $25 million that kind of coalesced everything around that and made that happen around homelessness. I think around food, because there's been so much of it, and we've just depended on it, especially since the Second World War. I think that now we have our doubts about the present system, but we don't know what to do to change that. It is my sense that the city itself, it is spending time. I've met with the new city manager. I know we've spoken with politicians and management folks at City Hall. There is this awareness that we are starting to run into a place in which the charitable system, helping people that are hungry, might not be enough as the needs become greater. So it has been my sense that there is a growing desire and awareness within the entire community. It includes the research group, post-secondary education system, the health groups, the health center here, because we work a lot with the Middlesex London Health Unit. It is my sense that they now realize the past is no longer sufficient. Mm-hmm. What the future will be, we don't know. Mm-hmm. So in my sense, food has been a predominant thing, but I don't think we had yet worked our way out of it. So many groups, and I really credit groups like Urban Roots or The Patch, or Cavendish Gardens and others who've all began to say, well, you folks are spending all your time figuring that out at policy levels or at economic levels. We're just going to start growing our own. And you and I have met with tons of teachers, and there's groups like, for instance, Growing Chefs that are working within the school system. They really want kids to get this staple when they're young and growing, how to work with food, and that part includes growing it and growing your own. So I'm actually very excited about it. Unlike homelessness, which has become a fairly modern phenomena that's happened in the last decade or so, I think the awareness of food has been with us from the beginning. And but now that whole system is beginning to change, I think there are many new and innovative groups out there, and I can think of them. I think of groups like the Western Fair, and I think of groups that are looking at all of these different ways of doing it. The Food Bank is doing the same. We've got the greenhouse, we've got the gardens, we've got the large compost operation. We're looking now at the farm in the box. So I think it's a very exciting time to be around. I just wish it wasn't linked to suffering. Yeah. That's right. If it just, so many Canadians, millions and millions of Canadians are now food insecure. I don't like that idea of them waking up in the morning and not knowing if they're going to have enough food to put on the table. So I think that to me is a very exciting time. I wish, though, that so many people, the thing that was bringing about the change wasn't so much human suffering. I wish it was just good common sense. So I think that's the main thing that has stuck with me. Is it your sense, Jane, because you work a lot with the community organizations and others, is it your sense that there may be how should I put this, a little bit too preoccupied with just trying to survive and really are having trouble? We have spoken to some, you and I have, who feel that they're going through burnout. Yep. Right? It's just all of these changes have taken place. Some have lost 100% of their funding and they've come to the food bank. Is it your sense that that's a temporary thing, or do you think that'll be ongoing?
So that's a really good question. I think burnout is a very difficult thing in many ways. I think the folks who have been around for a while originally got involved like we did. It's a passion. It's not a 9-to-5 kind of job. It's a 24-hour idea that even if you're not at work, you're kind of always wrestling with. I think people like that have gotten burnt out. I think newer folks at times that come involved, they're still passionate and all those things, but sometimes they've learned the secret of trying to keep that separate so they don't get burned out. But at the same time, once you get into it, the needs are so great and you want to be able to respond to those needs and you want to be able to make a difference. And I think individual burnout, particularly during the pandemic, was really tough because people were facing fear. I think organizations are facing burnout because, I look at groups and you get involved because you want to make a difference, or you want to change things, and then you find yourself 25 years later, you're still doing exactly the same thing, except more and bigger. And I sometimes look at the system and go, is that right? Like, things don't seem to change. I think our underlying philosophies are great, but I know when other groups started to deal with homelessness years and years ago, they were kind of the new group that got involved, and now there's more and more new groups starting up, and it just seems to keep growing. And I think there's a burnout of, when is it going to end? I think that bigger idea is kind of tough to handle.
Food Banks Canada put out a thing last week, so that's a network of all the food banks across the country. They've been doing their own research and stuff, but they're talking about how the levels of burnout at food banks is now getting alarmingly high.
Yeah.
So I can see that. Do you feel that?
That's a really interesting question too. Sometimes I do, and then sometimes I don't. I think we don't get burned out overall because we're trying to meet the need, but we're not trying to grow to meet the need in the context of the philosophy is, this is what we have, let's use what we have to deal with it, versus this is the problem, let's try to raise everything we can to deal with the problem. I think that allows for, look, we do the best we can. I think there's always something to be done, there's always difficulties, there's always things, and that does hang over my head sometimes, and I do feel burnout from that. But then I look at the volunteers and the fact that we're providing places and they're coming with their excitement and their involvement and just, the desire to make a difference. And I think we're actually in a really good spot. Do you feel burnout?
No, not at all. I feel worry.
Yeah.
I get burned out a bit that way, I think. But I think you're the one down there really helping to make the operation run. My job is more in the community. But I do think that one would naturally think that having 3,000 volunteers in your database would burn you out really fast, right? I mean, that's a lot to take care of and a lot of things to do. On the other hand, we as a food bank, we have a very small staff compared to other food banks our size.
Or other agencies,
Or other agencies, that's right. And a lot of the other agencies have depended on government funding and other things to keep these staffing levels going. As governments cut back, then they have trouble keeping the staff going, and I think that's where a lot of their burnout happens. They're having to do way more with less. With the food bank, you go down there every day and you see all of these volunteers, regular ones and others, all coming in and pitching in and not causing, we have our odd difficulty, but they're not causing any real problems or anything for us. They're taking the bulk of the load and they're just getting it done. Yeah. And they're doing it all for free. Yeah. It costs them, and I understand that it costs their time and other things, but I think for us, because we're a largely volunteer organization, in times of decline, and especially with government supports in decline, I think that the presence of volunteers, and especially so many of them, have made it possible for us and the staff at the food bank to kind of catch our breath, right, and not get overwhelmed by the things that are coming up against us. The volunteers just always seem to be there. How long have some of them been with us?
Oh my goodness, years and years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, some 5 at the beginning of the pandemic, and they cycle through, obviously, because it can be demanding depending on what you're doing. So I think the volunteers serve the people and do the food, and staff tends to spend most of their time doing it, serving the volunteers or providing an atmosphere for the volunteers to do their work. I think we're not perfect, but we're balanced, and any volunteer could probably point out all the things that we don't do or whatever, but basically it's this balancing act of humanity where every personality and volunteer is a bit different, has different ideas, but they all kind of come together for the common good. And I think it does make a huge difference, and in many ways that's the things that I get the most joy out of actually down there.
It is a huge experiment, though. I remember when CBC came and did a live show at the food bank at Christmas there, and I remember the host of the show just saying, it's all of these component parts at the food bank, and we're not trying to sit there and manage them and manage all their time and all that kind of stuff. We're just kind of getting together and say, okay, here are the demands of the day or of the month or whatever it is. Let's all just come together and let's make that happen. And it does every day. Like, it's such.
It does, but we do manage them.
No, I know we do. Well, you manage them, and so do the other staff. But my point is, they show up and they say, okay, yeah, I got it. And it's wonderful. And some of the staff members or the volunteers, as you said, have been there for 2 decades or more. We actually give them supervisory roles to help us, and we've done that for a lot of years. But I do have to say that I think that it's beyond all of the things that the food bank does is that organic feel of a community all in one place, making this kind of difference, sending out food to places that will never fully know what people are going through and the challenges that they feel. And then there's this general public in the business community that make all of these contributions, and we hardly ever see them. But the donations come in, people just really care. There's something wonderful about that, almost magical to me. It's been there from the very first when we started 38 years ago. You can just see it, and what you kind of want to do there is not so much overmanage it. You want to let it go and kind of see what comes of it. And Londoners, even with the pandemic and now what's happened since in the economy, they've not let up on those pursuits. They've just continued to donate, right?
No, and not just to us, because it's never just about the food bank. It's all of those different organizations. It's Meals on Wheels. It's Unity Project. It's Inova. It's My Sister's Place. Whatever. There's lots of different groups making a difference, and the public's been really great with them as well.
It's one of the great things for us as a food bank is that by working with all of those different groups, you kind of get a feel for the community, whereas if we just worried about our own stuff and feeding our own clients, that's very important. And our clients are up close to 6,000 families a month, right? So there's a lot of challenges there. But to see what the others are going through, I think gives us a sense of not only the feel of the community, but all of us as organizations have to have one another's back and try to help.
For sure. 100%.
But it's been an amazing year, Jane. I think for me, people came out of the pandemic and thought, okay, now let's get back to what we need to. But we never got the chance. Things just kind of went their own way, and that happened in so many sectors of society. And yet, I think you and I have been able to keep the faith for ourselves for the last 4 decades, because the public is just there. They just are. The business community are just there, and that allows us not to worry so much about that, but to concentrate instead on how can we help the community. And I know that's a big part of your responsibility, right? Yeah,
no, for sure. How can we help the community? And the community meaning all of it, everything from people who need help to people who want to help. And I think that's the food bank's place is kind of in the middle of that for sure. But its place is still in that bigger picture as well in terms of the food system. And I think we want to help that food system do better too. So. Yes,
and you're involved heavily with the Food Policy Council, which is something that's really near and dear to the food bank's heart. But I do sense that as we move into the summer and the growing season, it's such a great thing. On the other hand, I think we're very much aware as a food bank and all the agencies are, what comes next, we actually don't know. We're trying to prepare for it the best we can. The society is shifting and things aren't as they used to be. And we're just trying to keep on top of that and make sure that the different agencies and others are supplied the way that they should. But I presume as we move into this coming winter, there'll be a whole new set of challenges we have to face.
For sure.
As long as the public is there and helping us, it's all going to be okay. Thanks, Jane.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.